I got introduced to an older guy. His name was Jimmy Kachi. He was a capo in the LA family. Jimmy is armed robber, shooter, just is like more my type of guy.
Jimmy Kachi, originally from New York, was a feared and respected capo in the Los Angeles Mafia.
Los Angeles, there were a few more cowboys that came out here from the different families that operated almost independently, still having the backing of their respective families. L.A. is a much smaller venue than New York in terms of the mafia. You have 5 families in New York. You had 1 in Los Angeles.
You know, Jimmy's a capo in the LA family. He's like, one day he wanted to take a ride with me, and I started doing stuff with them. Jimmy Kachi told me at that point, no facial hair, you got to cut your hair, because I had like longer hair by then. And he's like, you got to cut your hair, you got to dress nicer. I went from like the doper 80s into this new 90s type thing.
Under Jimmy Kachi, Kenji moved up from the school of drug dealing and began his formal education in the world of organized crime.
Jimmy taught me a lot about organized crime and Cosa Nostra, the lifestyle. He taught me like how to act, how to dress, how to be respectful to people. Like he groomed me for that next step up where I needed to be. Being involved with the Mafia or the Cosa Nostra, it's like being in a minefield. You kind of got to walk in between it.
As Kenji's reputation with the West Coast Mafia grows, his reputation with women grew as well.
Of course, he came into contact with these big porn stars, and he actually dated a lot of them. He dated Savannah Smiles. He ended up dating Amber Lynn, who at the time was the top porn star in the world. And then he eventually met Tabitha Stevens, who was one of the top porn stars.
The first time I met Kenny was on a set. I was doing a movie for his company. Kenny was a gentleman. Kenny seemed to have himself put together very well. Kenny was very smart. Kenny was very sure of himself. And that was kind of an attraction, I think.
We were both young. I liked her. She said, hey, let's get married. I said, cool, let's do it. It wasn't a good idea on either of our parts. I married a porn star. She married a criminal.
When you're in my business, it's hard to find somebody that's going to be attracted to you for who you are, not exactly what your job is. And Kenny was that person.
Kenji's short-lived marriage to Tabitha opened up a new frontier for him, Las Vegas. Regular visits to Vegas to visit Tabitha's family placed Kenji in proximity to the notorious criminal world of the Vegas Strip, just in time for a shocking mob hit.
There was a murder that happened in Vegas. It was the Herbie Blitzstein murder. I remember we heard it on the news that this guy had been killed, and Kenny was in shock.
In 1997, Herbie Blitzstein, a Vegas mob icon, was executed with 3 shots to the back of the head. The press called this a mob murder, and the FBI opened their investigation.
Blitzstein was in the process of fighting his nomination to the Black Book when he was murdered.
Over a dozen mob associates in Las Vegas became suspects. Because of his connections with both L.A. and Las Vegas and his deep-seated roots within the drug trade and pornography industry, Kenji stood out. Although he ultimately wasn't implicated in the murder, the FBI was now introduced to Kenji Gallo.
The Feds had an operation going in Vegas, which I didn't know about it. They were trying to get guys that were in the LCN, the Mafia, that were in Vegas and in California.
As the weeks passed, the FBI was hot on Kenji's trail.
I was with my wife, and her grandmother called her, and she said, the FBI had just left my house.
The FBI wanted Kenji.
So I'm like, oh man, I'm in trouble. This is big trouble for me.
Kenji had 2 choices. Would he run, or would he make a deal with the FBI? By the late 90s, Kenji's life was on a criminal fast track. Part-time porn producer and full-time Los Angeles Mafia associate. But after the Herbie Blitzstein murder and the feds turning up the heat in Vegas, Kenji starts to feel the FBI on his heels.
I was with my wife, and her grandmother called her.
Asking to talk to Kenny, which was weird.
So I'm like, oh man, I'm in trouble. This is big trouble for me.
Kenji decides to talk with the FBI. They choose a diner by the highway for their first meeting.
So I figured I'm getting arrested for something. I have no idea what. So I gave my wife everything. I just wore a pair of sweats there because I figured if I'm going to go, I might as well be warm. When I walk in, he says, do you have any weapons on you? I'm like, no, I'm wearing sweats. I didn't got anything in my pocket. He just checked me real quick. He's like, okay, don't freak out. And I walk in through there, and I turn this corner into this like private part of the thing, and there was an agent sitting in there.
Unknown to Kenji, the FBI had been tracking him for months.
I was like, okay, you guys can arrest me now. He's like, no, we don't arrest you. He's like, you know, you got it for your insurance fraud. It's mail fraud.
They uncovered one of Kenji's street scams, car insurance fraud. The FBI had him where they wanted him.
But he goes, I'm going to tell you something. You get off on this, but we're going to get you for like RICO, or you're going to get killed.
Kenji's life with the mafia had caught up to him. The FBI gave him two choices: face charges and go to jail, or wear a wire, collect information on the mafia, and walk away.
That is an issue with the general public, even with some in law enforcement, as to why are we giving this guy a pass? Why are we giving him this get-out-of-jail card in order to get someone else? In order for us as law enforcement to do our jobs, sometimes we have to make deals with the devil.
I think Kenny knew before he even went and sat down with the Bureau that he was going to cooperate. He realized pretty quick that these mobsters were nothing more than greedy, murderous people who didn't look out for each other. There was no code. There was no glamorous life.
Kenji had a decision to make: become a cooperating witness or take his chances with the FBI watching his every move.
I was headed down a path where I would be killed or I'd be in prison for RICO for the rest of my life. The whole life of organized criminal, everything was a waste because everything I built up, everything that I did was built on sand. It was just gone away. It was a complete waste of my life.
Kenji's life has turned 180 degrees, from a mafia associate to a rat for the FBI. And now there are new rules to play by.
There is that very thin line, and you have to be so careful that you don't cross it. That's the most difficult thing, because you know that virtually every word you're saying is being recorded. Everything you're doing is probably going to go to court.
When I first started wearing a wire, I used to wrap it up with my money and then put a rubber band around it. Sometimes I'd keep it in my pocket. No one ever checked me, so it didn't matter.
Kenji embraced his role as a cooperating witness, but he didn't think he was being used to his full capacity.
I had had conversations with Kenny where he had complained that he had information for multi-kilo narcotics traffickers. His handlers weren't interested. Kenny wanted to run 24/7, and quite often he was being held back by his handlers. Couldn't possibly do all the things that Kenny wanted to do.
There really was that adrenaline addiction. There was a rush to working undercover. I think most of the informants that I worked with enjoyed that thrill. They got involved in criminal activity because of a thrill, and they were still allowed to maintain their involvement, only this time they were on this side of the law.
It took a lot of nerve to do what Kenny did. I mean, to put a wire on and go into somebody's house or into a nightclub is a very dangerous thing. You could be killed. Kenny seemed to be the type of guy that could just turn that fear off and go in, take care of business, and come out unscathed.
It wasn't long before Kenji's West Coast handlers had other plans for their star rat on the East Coast. Given Kenji Gallo's LA mob connections, he'd be the perfect cooperating witness to infiltrate the New York mob.
I wanted to move up and come to Brooklyn and go to the heart of where this is, and I wanted to be with a real family.
With some connections already established with the Colombo family, Kenji was able to make the move from California to New York. But Brooklyn was not Orange County, California. In Brooklyn, Kenji would begin leading his double life. But where would his loyalty lie? After living most of his life as an LA mob associate, Kenji Gallo now works for the other side. He flipped. He's a cooperating witness. He's a rat. By wearing a wire and recording his conversations with associates, Kenji helps to gather evidence and information on mobsters. Kenji is also getting good at it.
I decided I needed to get to New York permanently. And I was already meeting with Colombo family guys and guys from Bay Ridge, like street guys. So I already knew I had a place here.
He jumped in, it was like a duck to water. He felt very comfortable there.
The feds had Kenji use his established contacts to infiltrate the New York family he knows best, the Colombos.
For more than 100 years, there have been 5 major crime families, the 5 families that have controlled the mob activities, in the New York metropolitan area. The Genovese crime family, the Gambino crime family, the Bonanno crime family, the Lucchese crime family, and the Colombo crime family. The Colombo crime family, for more than 20 years, has been headed by Carmine Persico, the godfather of the crime family. All the Persicos have a reputation for violence.
Ken became very close with the Persicos, probably the most psychopathic, murderous, bloodthirsty family in the history of the mafia. And that's certainly saying a lot.
Now, Kenji is playing for the other side. In the war between the FBI and the 5 mafia families of New York, Kenji is the newest weapon, armed not with a gun or a knife, but with a wire hidden in his pocket. It didn't take long for Kenji to fit right in with New York. His first piece of work for his new mobster friends involved the release of Colombo capo, Teddy Persico Jr.
This is the most important thing you're ever gonna do. What am I gonna do? Because I've done a lot of things, but how important is this? He's like, listen, Teddy's getting out of prison in 2 days, and we gotta arrange a limo ride for him back. And I'm like, that's it? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, but you can't tell anyone about this. And I'm like, I'm not gonna tell anyone.
But Kenji does tell the FBI, and the name Teddy Persico Jr. strikes a chord.
Teddy Persico Jr. is the nephew of the boss of the crime family, Carmine Persico. Teddy Jr. early on established himself as a moneymaker for the crime family. He was convicted of drug dealing back in the 1980s. During the 16, 17 years he actually was serving his time, he's said to have controlled a lot of the drug dealing that the Colombo crime family was still involved in.
The Colombos want Kenji to use his porn connections to arrange for a welcome back gift for Teddy on the day of his release from prison.
You need to get escorts for the ride back from Greenhaven State Penitentiary for Teddy. And I said, all right. They wanted to be perfect for Teddy. We're gonna give you a garbage bag that has to be in the limousine. And in the garbage bag is a tracksuit, $1,000 cash, a cell phone, and a watch for Teddy. They give me the garbage bag. They finally dropped me off at right after 12. So I opened that bag and I took the cell phone out and I went for a jog.
The FBI had secretly prearranged a spot for Kenji to hand off the Persico cell phone. While Kenji jogs through the empty streets, the FBI rig a wiretap. Then the switch is made and the trap is set.
So I got that phone back, I put it back in the bag of the limousine, went to pick up Teddy.
Teddy Persico is getting out of jail after 16 or so years in prison. He walks out of the joint and he's met by this limousine that's filled with booze, and this porn star hooker is there waiting for him, and she ends up giving him a cell phone.
Teddy gets out after being in there 17 years. He's never seen a cell phone, doesn't know how to program this. He puts on his white sneakers, his tracksuit.
As soon as Teddy Persico got out of jail and got into that car, he was dead to rights 5 minutes into the ride, telling Kenny that, I'm going to be taking over soon. He didn't make it back to his house before they already had this guy committing criminal activity on the way home from jail.
Kenji's wiring of Persico had already successfully implicated him in a crime, but the FBI had much bigger plans for bringing him down. They wanted Kenji to befriend the Colombo capo to get something they knew would finally put him away for good. But now, Teddy is back on the street and has to watch his every step.